In this demo, I'm going to show you guys how you can use Photoshop to add reflections and create reflective surfaces in like glass and things like that. So for example, we see here this Worcestershire bottle sauce, and we can see some reflection right down here at the bottom of the glass. But up in here, it's really dead and kind of black and flat, and then we get reflections in the cap. So this kind of makes the product look a little flat. This is just kind of bad photography at this point, and ideally, if you were working with a photographer and you saw this, you would ask them to reshoot it. But sometimes time constraints, you don't have that option. So this is a nicely shot bottle in terms of a nice even lighting. But you see how we can see some reflections in the glass, and that's usually done in the studio. And if you have photography experience, you know what I'm talking about with reflector cards, black cards or white cards that are positioned so that they can create these kind of shadows because the glass is picking up the reflection of the black card or the white cards. So because these are like really organic shapes, they're really kind of loose shapes, we can use this as an example in terms of how we want to create these kind of shapes and shadows into our Worcestershire bottle sauce. So it's mainly going to be this guy right here that we're going to be affecting a lot of those kind of shadows in. We might do a little bit more in the sides of the label too, but not too much because I don't want the demo to get too long for you guys. So a lot of what you're going to be doing here is going to be on multiple layers, and you're going to be using the freeform lasso tool. So what we'll do here is we'll create us a layer, and I'm going to use the freeform lasso tool here and just kind of hide the bottom. I'm kind of using this as a reference. I could create shadows here or here or in the center of the bottle or whatever, so I'll just kind of show you really quick. So I'm going to draw kind of a free form shape. And because it's light down here and dark on the sides, that's why I did my shape here, because I'm going to want this to be light and to keep the kind of darkness on the side. So we're going to just go ahead and fill this with white on my new layer. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to blur this because I want it really kind of soft. So I'm going to go to my filters. I'm going to go to blur. I'm going to select Gaussian blur. And I'm just kind of making it really kind of soft around the edges. Then I'm going to do a layer adjustment to it. I'm going to pick like kind of a soft light. And you can already see how it's, you know, kind of improving the bottle by giving it some substance. And I could do, like I can make the light rather than a white. I could do any kind of color that I want. And since it's like a dark liquid in there, I'm going to really kind of go to a darker, sort of kind of brownish, sort of orange. See how it's, you know, kind of matching it in here. So I'll adjust my color down a little bit so it's not quite so white. I'll click OK. That's pretty good. And you can see how instantly I start getting some nice abstract sort of shapes in there. And so I might create another layer, and I might add some highlights to the edge of the bottle. So I'm going to load the selection that the bottle is on by holding my option key down and putting my marching ants around there. I'm going to set a brush, and we're going to make the brush kind of big, and we're going to make the softness really soft. But one of the things I'm going to do here, it's kind of a painter thing, is we build in layers. So I am going to cut the flow so it's not 100% white blasting out, and I'm going to set it to like 19%, maybe 20% or so. 25 is good. I just don't want a full blast of white paint coming out. And I'm going to set my brush kind of big, and I'm going to go on my layer and just kind of brush in some really kind of soft highlights. And we'll drop the brush down a little in size so I can get the neck here really good. Kind of creates those hot spots. We'll hide those marching ants so you can kind of see what we're doing, and we'll turn off our layer here in the background. And so now I'm starting to get those kind of reflections in the bottle as well. And then I'm going to name this my highlights. Again, layer organization important. We'll name that bottle reflection. And I might come down on my highlights layer and I might paint some highlights here in the sides, just so it kind of matches what I got going on up here at the top. So, and I can keep on going with this, putting in some more dark shadows in here in the bottle. Like if they had, I've done this more like it's a kind of an even light. I might dial down the opacity of that highlight a little bit, so it's not quite so stark. That's pretty good. And then I could create another layer and create my shadow tool, and we'll deselect it here, and again just kind of creating another layer here, and we will just filling it with black. I'm actually gonna do this again. Fills it more with a black, because it would be a black card that they would be using. And I'm going to go to my filters. I'm going to select my Gaussian blur again. See how it kind of softens it out. I'm going to give it a little more form to it rather than a complete blur out. But I want it soft, but I don't want it too blown out either. Click OK. And I'm going to erase where it's kind of going over my label here a little bit. So we'll click here and here. And see how I'm starting to get some of my more abstract shapes in here. So it's starting to look a little bit like, you know, my bottle as my reference. And you know, I can dial down some of the opacity on this one if I want, so I can get some of that brown through it. It's not so stark. There we go. I'll name that layer as call it my darker shadows or reflection. Turn off that, and now it's starting to really kind of show up. So to kind of give you a little kind of summary of it, this is where my bottle was, nice and kind of flat, and then just kind of painting in some of my abstract sort of shapes. I can kind of create the illusion a little more of the bottle has some actual reflections to it. And like I said, something like this would spend a lot more time on it than I'm showing you guys, painting more things into it and stuff like that, more highlights, more reflection surfaces. And it's really helpful to have, you know, a nice reference that you can kind of see shapes and see reflections in, and the color change in value. So have a good reference to work from, and then you're just kind of duplicating the shapes that you see in there using Gaussian blurs and brush tools and things like that. But we don't want the demo to get too long, so you kind of get the general idea of it. But that's how we create reflections in Photoshop.